Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I do apologize. I know that it has been a really long time since I have filmed for my Julia Jean book channel. I wanted to take a little bit of a break, and I guess I just didn't realize how long it actually has been since I have filmed and made book content, but I'm so excited for today's video, and I already have some plans going into the fall for ideas for this channel. So I am officially back to making videos here on Julia Jean, and I thought it would be really fun to start off by sharing some of my favorite books that I read this summer. Okay, so the first book I'm going to talk about, I actually listened to on Audible. It's called Midnight Valentine. So the main character in this book is named Megan, and she recently has moved to Seaside, Oregon to open a bed and breakfast. Now this was a dream that her and her husband had. Unfortunately though, at the start of this story, it has been 5 years since her husband passed away. However, she still wants to go to Oregon and fulfill this dream that they had together. So once she gets there, she moves into this old Victorian home that needs a lot of fixing upping, and there's only one carpenter in the area that really can actually do all of the necessary renovations that she needs, and his name is Valentine. Now Theo is very reclusive. He was in a very traumatic accident years ago, and he no longer talks. And while Theo is very much a mystery, there is a romance that sparks between the two of them. There are also some paranormal coincidences that go on, but I can't really explain what that means or how that fits into the story without spoiling things for you. This author, J.T. Jessinger, she does a very good job of writing really mysterious and twisty romances. My favorite by hers is Pen Pal. I gave this book 4 stars because while it was really good, I do feel like certain parts of it kind of dragged on, hence why it was 4 stars instead of 5 stars. However, I did still really enjoy it, and I would highly recommend. And then 3 chili peppers on the spice scale because there were a few in-depth sexually explicit scenes. However, the book was much more plot heavy than spice heavy. Okay, next up we have Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This was actually one of my book club's picks, and I mean, you want to talk about a perfect book for the summer? Right here. This is actually book 3 in a series. However, it can be read as a standalone. Like, I read this book first and I haven't even read the other 2 yet, and I was perfectly fine. So this story is a contemporary romance, and it follows Justin and Emma, who both believe that they have a curse that every time they date someone, when they break up, that person moves on to find the love of their life, like the person they're going to marry. So then Justin and Emma decide to break that curse and date each other, so then they can try to break up after the summer to find their one true love. So that's why it's called Just for the Summer, because they're gonna try to date just for the summer. This book was honestly so much more emotional than I was expecting. While this was a really sweet summer romance, it also had a lot of depth and character growth to it, and it also dealt with some traumatic subjects such as like a toxic family member, specifically a toxic mother, closing yourself off from others, and it dealt a little bit with depression too. I gave this book 4.5 stars because it was like really close to a 5-star read for me, but it just, I don't know, it just didn't quite reach that mark. And then I gave it a 2 chili pepper on the spice level because there were a few explicit scenes, but they weren't too overly detailed, and they were definitely more sweet as opposed to just plain smutty. My biggest takeaway from this book too is that if you have the choice between choosing anger and empathy, always choose empathy. All right, next up I have A Ballad of Phantoms and Hope by K.M. Moranova. This is like a spin-off sequel to The Fabric of Our Souls. So honestly, you can't really read this book unless if you read that first one, because this is not gonna make much sense. So I'm not really going to dive into exactly what this book is about because it would completely spoil The Fabric of Our Souls, but what I will say is I gave this book 5 stars. It was beautifully written, it was so poetic, and it was so immersive. Like, it truly just felt like watching a movie in my head. And this is actually, I want to say it's kind of like a special edition of this book because it's a fancy hardback. It has artwork on the cover and the back. So those are the 2 main characters. That's Lanston and that is Ophelia. And also I feel so lucky because this is a signed copy from the author. I got this from her website. And one thing that I love about K.M. Moranova's books is that throughout all of her print copies of her books, she has artwork throughout all of them. And I believe she draws all of them herself too, which I just think is so cool. I did give this book 5 stars, and then I rated it 2 on the chili pepper scale. Okay, this book, The 7-Year Slive, felt like the perfect summer read. It was sweet, it was romantic, it was fun, it had a little bit of magic in it. It was emotional, but wasn't like too much, like didn't make me cry or anything like that, but it just really pulled at my heartstrings, and it was just a really fun book to read. So this book follows Clementine, who moves into this apartment that was her aunt's. Unfortunately, her aunt has passed away, and at this point, Clementine moves into the apartment, but what she doesn't know is that the apartment is kind of magical. So there are times where you step into the apartment and you are either 7 years in the future or you are 7 years in the past, and you don't know when you're gonna walk in, what timeline you're going to get. The apartment just kind of randomly does it. And then one day she walks into her kitchen and she sees this man there, and they kind of just say, oh, well, I guess you are gonna be living here, I'm gonna be living here. They thought it was like some sort of roommate problem. Anyway, what happened was he was living in that apartment, but it was 7 years in the past. But now it's 7 years later, and Clementine and this guy, their lives keep intertwining. This was honestly just a really cute and sweet read. Next up, I want to talk about Manacled. Now, this book changed my brain chemistry, and I feel like it found me at the right time, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think I would have enjoyed this book even a year or 2 ago. I think the timing of it just led up perfectly, and I feel like I was old enough, emotionally mature enough, and just had that like love of reading so much that I was able to get through this book, because it is so long. So I feel like if you're not an avid reader, this is not something that you would enjoy. And it's also not something that you would enjoy if you're not a Harry Potter fan. So Manacled is Harry Potter fanfic. What fanfic is basically where you can take a story that someone else has written and you write something that's based off of that. So in this fan fiction, it is written as if Voldemort killed Harry. Like, it's as if Harry never won and if Voldemort won, what that future would have looked like. And it really follows Hermione and Draco. It is a Hermione and Draco romance, which I never thought I would have loved, but I ended up just becoming like obsessed with it. But this book is very trigger heavy. There is war. There are points where Hermione is agoraphobic, and so it really dives into mental illness, and it also is very similar to The Handmaid's Tale, because Voldemort basically starts a repopulation effort and Hermione gets assigned to Draco, and eventually there is a love story between the two of them, and it was phenomenal, like absolutely beautiful. And if you like Harry Potter, I do highly recommend it. However, this book, it's not like, you can't buy a print copy of it because it's fan fiction, so you have to go to the AO3 website, and I will put a link to the video that I watched that explained how to get this book onto your Kindle, because without that video I would have had no idea. But anyway, yeah, if you love Harry Potter and if you're in the mood for a very long book, then I highly recommend. Next up, I have There Are No Saints by Sophie Lark. This is book 1 of 2. I actually haven't read the second book yet, but I did thoroughly enjoy this one. This is a dark romance. I honestly would say this is like a really good starter dark romance book, because it was dark, but it wasn't like the craziest and darkest thing I've ever read before. So there's this guy named Cole, and he is a sculptor in San Francisco, and he is very quickly drawn to this lady named Mara, who is basically a starving artist also in San Francisco. And you know, he starts following her around, and slowly their lives just become intertwined. There is a romance in here. It very much reminded me of the books and the show You on Netflix. So I will say I would highly recommend this if you like dark and spicy books, but if that is not your vibe, that's totally fine, and I would not recommend this book for you. Now, a book that I read this summer and I am still thinking about is The Butterfly Garden. Honestly, I don't really know what category this book would fall under. I guess it would be thriller, but it didn't read like a thriller. It just read like a normal book, but it had thrilling aspects to it. I don't know, very similar to like an episode of Criminal Minds maybe. Now, the reason why I read this book actually is because the character Mara in this book was reading the book The Butterfly Garden, and then I saw an advertisement for The Butterfly Garden on Facebook, and I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I absolutely need to read this because it has been shown to me twice. I feel like it is fate. But anyway, The Butterfly Garden, it's so hard to even explain what it's about because so much happens. So there's this guy, and he calls himself the gardener, and he essentially kidnaps these women and he keeps them in his garden. He has this like mansion that they live in, and he tattoos these very intricate and beautiful butterfly wings on them, and he calls them his little butterflies. So the story actually starts with the main character, Maya, when she is being interviewed by the FBI. So you know at this point, okay, the garden has been discovered, but then when she talks to the FBI, it goes into flashbacks about everything that happened to her and to the other women in the garden before they were rescued. So at this point, you know that they get out of the garden and that they are rescued, but you don't know how, and you don't know the backstory of everything that happened to her until you continue reading the book. And now I know that this is book 1 in a series. I, however, have not decided if I want to continue on with the series, even though I loved the first book. It's just very heavy and it's very intriguing and interesting, but I don't know, I just have to wait and see how I feel going into the rest of them. I'm going to loop these 2 books together because they are interconnected standalone. So what that means is they're about different characters and they can be read separately, like they can be read in whatever order you would like. However, I would recommend reading Trist, 6th Venom before 5 Brothers by Penelope Douglas. Now, you guys know I'm a lover of Penelope Douglas. Their books are incredible. Just about every time I pick one up, I really love it. The only book that I haven't loved by Penelope Douglas is Credence. And what's funny is I heard that 5 Brothers was going to be similar to Credence, and so I was a little worried I wouldn't like it. However, I gave both Trist, 6th Venom and 5 Brothers 5 stars. So Trist, 6th Venom follows Clay and Olivia. This is a bully sapphic romance. Now, these 2 girls hate each other, yet they crave each other. Amazing enemies to lovers with a fantastic plot as well. Clay is rich, like she comes from like, you know, the upper class of the area that they live in, and Olivia, she's from across the tracks, okay? She's from the area of town where I guess you could say like the more poor people live, so they live very different lifestyles, but they are just obsessed with each other, and I could not put this book down. I could not get enough of it. Now, book 2 follows Olivia's brothers, and there is one girl named Christian, and she becomes, you know, friends with all of the brothers. She's a character from book 1, and there's a lot of spice and a lot of romance. Let's just say, well, she is trying to figure out which brother is, you know, her hero, which brother is the best fit for her. Both of these books honestly just kept me on the edge of my seat. I could not put them down. I loved the world. I loved the setting. However, these books are a little dark and they are very, very spicy. So if that is not something that you feel like you would be interested in, then I wouldn't recommend it for you. But if you've read Penelope Douglas books before and you like that vibe, then oh my gosh, you have to read these. Another book that I read that I absolutely loved was The Crimson Moth. This is also known as Heartless Hunter. This is the EU UK edition of this book. So this book follows Rune and Gideon. Rune is a witch and Gideon is a witch hunter, so you have enemies to lovers here. I felt like this book was just really fun. It was very well written and it was very intricate, like you could really feel like you were part of the world. I really liked the magic system that was involved, and there is like a really big betrayal in this book too that I was not expecting, and so that was really fun to read. This book also had maybe like one spicy scene in it, so if you're looking for like a really good intro to fantasy book that is like really low on spice, then I would highly recommend this one for you. Now, the last book that I read this summer that I really want to talk to you guys about, I actually listened to on Audible, and that was Fairy Tale by Stephen King. The only other book that I have read by Stephen King was The Institute, and I did really enjoy that one as well. So I think the reason why I liked this one is because it wasn't necessarily horror. I haven't read any horror books by Stephen King. Maybe I should do that. But anyway, Fairy Tale follows this kid named Charlie. He's 17 years old, I believe, at the beginning of the book, and he's walking along one night and he hears this dog barking, and this dog is just going crazy, and so he goes basically to this guy's house to see what's going on, and he sees that this elderly man has fallen, and so he like calls 911 and they take care of him, blah blah blah. Well, Charlie and Mr. Bowditch is the guy who fell, they end up forming, I would say, a bond, more of like a caretaker bond, where he starts taking care of him, and then he also really helps take care of his dog Radar. Now, when Mr. Bowditch unfortunately passes away, Charlie inherits the house that he lives in, as well as the magical realm that lives underneath it. And so the story really goes on where Charlie ventures down with Radar into this magical realm, and he eventually has to fight good versus evil. What I thought was so cool about this book was that it was really magical, but it was so well written and so easy to understand that, I don't know, you just felt like you could really like dive into that world, and it was just fascinating. Also, this book is being turned into a movie, which I think will be awesome. So I always love reading books that are turned into movies in the future. So these are just some of my favorite books that I read this summer. What are some of your favorite books that you read? Let me know. I want to hear about it all in the comment section below. Or if you read any of the books that I read, what did you think about those too? I hope that you all are having a great day. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you liked it, please give me a big thumbs up. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, because I would love to see you again in future videos. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.